I am currently in the middle of analyzing Taylor Swift's entire discography, and today we are tackling her pop trilogy, as I like to call it, 1989, Reputation, and Lover. This was an era of Taylor's life that saw so many things happen for her. She reached a new peak in her career, rising to the top of the music industry. Then she saw it all fall apart right in front of her. She began her 6-year relationship with Joe Alwyn, and so many other new developments in her life that I think are really beautifully reflected in the music here. So in this video, we are going to be diving deep into these albums, going through the music, and talking about the core themes, messages, and stories that each of these albums tell, about Taylor starting to realize the kind of person she is, what she truly values in her life, and what it means about Taylor Swift's discography and music and artistry as a whole. You might be wondering why I'm only covering 3 albums now in this part. That's because I have a lot to say about them. For one, these albums are really deep, in my opinion. With her first 4 albums, that really was Taylor Swift's introduction into the music industry, her rise to fame. Now though, during this time period, Taylor Swift is really going through a lot, and so I think this has produced some of her richest work thematically, and there is a lot to untangle. Also, this is the era when I became a fan of Taylor, so I just have a lot of fondness for this period of her career. I have a lot of nostalgia associated with it, and so I just really love talking about it. This is a part 2 to a video I did last week talking about her first 4 albums, and I really strongly recommend you watch that if you haven't already, because Taylor Swift's albums really flow thematically from one to the next. They kind of paint a story of her entire life, and so I think understanding the previous albums and all the analysis I did there is going to make the analysis in this video make more sense. And more importantly, what I did in that first video is I established the structure by which we are going to analyze all of Taylor Swift's albums, and that is the dramatic plot structure, which is typical of a lot of stories, especially movies. And I wanted to do that because I think Taylor Swift's albums are designed like stories, not just each individual song, but the progression of songs throughout the entire album that makes a full theatrical experience almost from start to finish. So before we get into 1989, I'm going to do a brief recap of what I went over in that video, if you haven't seen it, but if you have, you can skip ahead or you can go there and then come back. But to recap, as I mentioned, the overall goal with this analysis going through all of Taylor Swift's albums is trying to analyze them as stories from start to finish and uncovering what are the key concepts that each album is about, kind of like a 1 or 2 word abstract noun that we can boil each album down to, along with what is Taylor trying to say about that concept, because that gives us the theme of the album, the overall message she's conveying, and what it means for that album and that era as a whole. The other critical thing I set up in part 1 is how I'm analyzing all these albums, which is using the dramatic plot structure. And what I do is I take key moments from this plot structure and apply them to Taylor's albums. Especially with part 1, those first 4 albums, the dramatic plot structure really works well to construct the album and construct the story that she's telling from start to finish. Again, I explained this a lot more in depth in part 1, and we get a lot of really interesting developments throughout these albums. So without further ado, let's get started with... Once again, we start on a little bit of a trickier album. Everyone knows 1989 as Taylor's big transition into pop, and pretty much what really brought her to the forefront of the music industry. With most music videos from this era having over 1 billion views on YouTube, and the album containing multiple of her most popular and well-known songs to date, this era truly was something else for her. But because of that, I think people largely view 1989 as just a big career shift, a pop bible, so to say. And while those things are definitely true, I don't think that excludes 1989 from having interesting themes and an interesting story to it as well. It's just that it's a little harder to pinpoint this time around, mainly because, as I've said before, track 5 usually gives us the crux of the conflict pretty easily laid out, and that allows us to piece together the rest of the album. This time, however, I think track 5 is actually a little bit vague and doesn't really give us as much to work with. All You Had to Do Was Stay is still a great song, of course, but it's not heart-wrenching quite like her other track 5s. It's more poppy, and the lyrics feel kind of standard. But again, in order for these analyses to work, we have to assume author intention, and that Taylor is still sticking to the same dramatic plot structure that we know she has aligned her albums to almost perfectly up until now. So instead, I think the theme will piece itself together from other parts of the album, and then we can come back to track 5 and see how it works as the inciting incident to those other elements. So let's start on the exposition, and I think this one is particularly powerful. Track 1, Welcome to New York, is all about embracing the glamour of the big city. A lot of her track ones really focus on using vivid imagery to create the setting of the album. You know, Tim McGraw utilizes country town imagery, like Chevy trucks and back roads and blue jeans. Fearless utilizes imagery of rain and dancing to set the tone of fantasy throughout that album. So on, so on. Welcome to New York is a stark pivot from all of those, with imagery now of big crowds, flashing lights, new apartments, and of course, the city of New York. This big shift itself is a metaphor for the big transition she was making out of country into pop, and how she's really embracing reinvention at this time. She's embracing this new beginning for herself. That's why me, along with some other people, I think, lament the shift to beach imagery that 1989 Taylor's version took, because this album isn't really a beach album. It's always been about the city, living that big life in high-rise apartments, being blinded by the flashing lights, where she can put the breakups aside and just embrace that grand, mystical, almost enchanting feeling you get. Now, the rest of the exposition is really fascinating to me, not only because it's the best 3-track run in her entire discography, yeah, but because it offers us a really new, interesting look at relationships. Ultimately, you know, what Taylor sings best about, what she's always sung about. But keeping in line with this big shift to the city showcased in the opening track, we have a new lens on relationships. Blank Space is all about satirizing her persona as this evil temptress who lures men in to leave them heartbroken and write devastating breakup songs about them that'll haunt them forever and ever. It's a satire on what the media was making her out to be, embracing that role and the mess of relationships in your 20s. Style is about an up and down relationship where you're never really sure what state you're in, but regardless, you never go out of style. Fashion is utilized throughout the chorus as a metaphor for the desire and charm of this relationship, how even amidst all the turbulence actually going on behind the scenes, it's still something people want and crave. It's still glamorous, it's still stylish. Notice how Style and Blank Space actually use very similar imagery though of a relationship being forever or burning in flames. Keep in mind where Taylor was at in her career at this point. She was becoming one of the biggest pop stars in the nation, but she was also being branded by society as that girl who just writes breakup songs, who goes through men like a train, who always plays the victim. So she pretty much just embraces that persona here, spinning it entirely on its head, saying, if that's what they think of me, then I'll be that bitch.
Don't call me that.
Out of the Woods is then pretty interesting because it seems to strip away that filter and give us a real look into Taylor's mind and the emotions she's experiencing in this tumultuous up and down relationship. Honestly, this song could function as a conflict and inciting incident. It really has that feel to it, but again, we're going to table it for all you have to do is stay. Keep this as part of the exposition, so I interpret it as setting up that there is a real emotional conflict to this album. Even in the big city, she does still feel lost and confused, as if trapped in the woods and trying to find her way out. Then of course we get track 5, the inciting incident, the conflict, but as I said before, this track 5 is kind of generic, at least on the surface, and it doesn't really seem to indicate any central guiding questions about those themes we've established so far to guide the rest of the album. So instead, I actually want to jump all the way ahead to the climax, which, based on our established dramatic plot structure, should be the highest intensity moment of the conflict established in track 5, and can thus maybe help us better understand what's going on here. The climax of 1989, in my opinion, is Wildest Dreams. I think out of all the tracks in the second half of this album, this is really what gives us all the emotions and intensity we need in a climax. I don't know, maybe I'm biased. You guys might know this is my favorite track on the album, but honestly, the only other track that seems to parallel this intensity is I Know Places, but I see that more of a mini climax within the falling action. More on that later. The key lyric for Wildest Dreams is in the pre-chorus, actually. I can see it end as it begins. Remember when people were playing this song at their weddings? Anyways, Wildest Dreams is not about a breakup that's happened, it's predicting a breakup that will happen. The chorus is entirely written in the future tense. Even though Taylor's relationship seems happy and glamorous and fun in the present, she's convinced her lover is going to leave her and that it is going to fall apart, just like all her other relationships have. It's a tragic moment where she seems to have kind of lost all of her hope in love, believing it can only persist in her and her lover's wildest dreams. Doesn't that kind of feel like a stark contrast from earlier in the album? In those expositional tracks, even though she knows the relationship is turbulent and wild, she puts a glamorized filter over it. In a sense, she kind of grits her teeth and says, it's gonna be fine. When we go crashing down, we come back every time. I mean, think back to Blank Space. If you interpreted that song literally, it's kind of the same as Wildest Dreams, you know? I can see it end as it begins. I've got a blank space and I'll write your name. Taylor knows the relationship is probably gonna end, and in Blank Space, she kind of frames herself as the one causing that demise, again, parodying what the media was making her out to be. Meanwhile, in Wildest Dreams, we kind of seem to get a glimpse of her true feelings on this issue. You know, Wildest Dreams is not satirical, it's not trying to play things out in a fun manner. It's pretty devastating and pretty tragic. Almost like she does actually believe she is that evil temptress. All love ever does is end in tragedy. Now, if we look at the rising action building up to that climax, it's very quick. It's only 3 songs, but they once again seem to try to grapple with the consequences and heartache of lost relationships in different ways, especially with this feeling she has that she's the villain in every story. Shake It Off is about brushing off that hate and dancing it out. I Wish You Would returns to that acceptance of being the wrongdoer, wishing you could go back and undo those actions. Then Bad Blood revels in those lost relationships and friendships. These are various manners Taylor tries to deal with her sense of loss over whatever the relationships might be, whether it's lovers, whether it's friends. And all this time, the media is constantly scrutinizing her for these losses until she lets it all out, in a sense, on Wildest Dreams, coming to terms with her grief and hoping those people she's hurt or who have hurt her will still remember her. And I think you can kind of see the pieces starting to come together, right? Now, let's come back to track 5, All You Had to Do Was Stay. With this build and intensity in mind, I think this track, being the inciting incident, shows us the moment where Taylor loses her faith in love. This song is about Taylor letting someone in, giving love a chance, but them still leaving in the end. This chorus is really kind of begging her lover to stay, but they just won't. See how this ties back into Wildest Dreams? This song, All You Had to Do Was Stay, seems to be the moment where she starts to have that sense of hopelessness, where she begins to lose her faith, since even when she does everything right, it still just doesn't seem to work. I think a really important lyric in this song for the story at large as well is, people like me are gone forever when you say goodbye. Maybe once upon a time she was willing to fight for the relationship, pull back and forth as she did in Red, but now she's tired of it. She's moved on to bigger things in life. She's chasing fame, you know? And once you say goodbye, that's it. It's gonna be forever, or it's gonna go down in flames. What I'm trying to say with all this is that 1989 as a whole seems to be riddled with this sense that love does not work. And when you want to chase glamour, and you want to chase fame and be in the big city, it's kind of something you have to accept. There's a feeling of permanence throughout this album, where you have to grit your teeth and make a decision that if this is how things are gonna be, then so be it. 1989 is an album about hope. Hoping for new beginnings in the big city, hoping for fame and prosperity and fortune, but simultaneously losing hope in relationships, in love, in people truly actually caring for you. The exposition sets up how the glamour of a new beginning can feel wonderful at first, how even amidst tumultuous relationships and media criticism you can put a filter over it and take joy in the cynicism. But as you pull back the mask, you realize that the hope you once had is gone, and relationships will always end tragically. And in a sense, the way I see it, it's almost like a direct consequence of her fame, of being in the big city. When I think of this album, I think a lot about that quote from Miss Americana where she won the Grammy for Album of the Year, but she still felt lonely. Really, that feels very in line with this album as a whole. This was the peak of her career. This was literally everything she ever dreamed of and hoped for. But it's almost like because of this image she developed of being unlovable, she herself began to believe that she is unlovable. And even at the top of your career, even when all the spotlights are on you, and everyone knows your name, you can still feel lonely. Because when the people who you care for leave you, it hurts. That to me is the crux of the story in 1989. And thus, as with all her albums, we must resolve that conflict. And I think this album comes to a really heartfelt conclusion at the end, trying to resolve those feelings of lost hope. With the Falling Action, we start with How You Get the Girl and This Love, which are about everything she's already sung about, on and off relationships, love being both good and tragic at the same time, but now, from an outside perspective, she's removed herself from the situation and is now kind of watching it play out like a movie in front of her. It's almost like she's kind of rekindling her lost hope in love, seeing relationships from an outside perspective, removing herself, and seeing how it can be beautiful. Mistakes happen, people fight, people cry, but you can make up, you can still find something good. Then we get I Know Places, which seems to be another final attempt at saving relationships from the media and from all these external factors, hiding away something good so you can really nurture it into something real. It's very intense, it's almost like a second climax, but it's almost the opposite of Wildest Dreams. Instead of love always ending, it can work if you keep it safe, if you let go of those self-vilifying beliefs. Finally, this album resolves on Clean, and I think Taylor herself has spoken on this song in a really beautiful way, and I'm just going to kind of read what she said. A heartbroken person is unlike any other. Their time moves at a completely different pace than ours. It's this mental, physical, emotional ache, feeling so conflicted, nothing distracts you from it. Then time passes, and the more you live your life and create new habits, you get used to not having a text message every morning. You get used to not calling someone at night to tell them how your day was. You replace these old habits with new habits, like texting your friends in a group chat and planning fun dinner parties and going out on adventures. This resolution is very similar to Begin Again, which resolves Red, another album having to do with grieving lost relationships, but Clean is more in line with 1989 because similar to these other tracks in the Falling Action, it gives us a sense of newfound hope. And really the message here is just that hope takes time. As she describes herself, Clean is just a song about the passage of time. How you can grapple with loss, you can drive yourself insane, you can give up all hope, and you might just have to sit in those feelings for a little bit, but eventually, there does come a day when you suddenly don't feel so burdened by that loss anymore, where you can develop new habits and rekindle the joy you once had, where you suddenly feel hopeful again, where you finally are clean. And that is my analysis of 1989. Notice how there were a lot of decisions I kind of made going through this album about what track falls where in the dramatic plot structure. Using this base structure, you can tell there are honestly multiple ways to go about analyzing the album, and I just want to clarify again, that is really a beautiful element of this in my opinion. As with any form of analysis you do, there are always multiple interpretations, and I think that's also what makes 1989 such an interesting album, and why it's become so popular, because at the end of the day, it is just kind of a series of hit songs, but deep down I do think there is still a story, and a truly beautiful one at that, and I think something, again, as with all of Taylor Swift's albums, something that a lot of people can relate to. Starting this off, I said 1989 was primarily Taylor's big switch into pop. And I think the theme of hope that I've come to is in line with that because I think hope is synonymous with wonder. There was so much wonder and anticipation with this big shift Taylor undertook in her career. And with that came hope for reinvention. Hope that even amidst all the chaos of her relationships behind closed doors, amidst her mistakes, she could still maintain people's approval. At this point in time, that was really all Taylor cared about. She's maturing, she's learning lessons with each album she releases, but she is still in a place where other people's approval matters a lot to her. And even at the top, maybe this was kind of a realization that she wasn't getting what she wanted. And as the approval she so desperately needed from other people didn't come, her hope waned and waned until the moment it all came crashing down, and she disappeared. That is, until... Reputation is about reputation. Yeah, I don't know if you expected like a much deeper answer for this one, but no, it's right there. Now, don't get me wrong, there is still a lot to discuss with this album. I mean, this is my favorite Taylor Swift album. This is probably her best era. I mean, come on, it's Reputation. But I do find Reputation to be one of her most cohesive albums when it comes to themes and story, on par with Red. And interestingly enough, it's because, the way I see it, there's actually two stories here intertwined together. There's the story of her coming back from her disappearance, dealing with the backlash and media mistreatment and the petty feuds, all that stuff. Then there's also the story of her falling in love with someone, developing a true, real relationship in secret, away from the public eye. And while both these stories seem entirely separate on face value, they actually go hand in hand together through the concept of reputation, painting an overall narrative of Taylor's life at this time and the message she's trying to portray. And to me, that is the beauty of this album, because it kind of takes some liberties with the dramatic plot structure, jumping between these storylines, but ultimately it's the same core message underlying every single song, making the whole listening experience just feel so beautifully tight-knit and cohesive. I mean, this was probably one of the most difficult times in Taylor's life, feeling like the entire world hated her and would not listen to her, not sure who was still on her side or not, just wanting to disappear forever. I can imagine she wrote tons and tons of songs during this time period, some of which, we'll probably hear when Taylor's version is released. But at the end of the day, she stripped it all down to these 15 tracks. No deluxe editions, no bonus tracks, nothing else. This was it. This is Reputation. And the way every track feels so in line with the stories at hand is what makes this such a powerful listening experience, in my opinion. So let's get into it. We start with track 1, Ready For It, which does a tremendous job of setting up both of these storylines simultaneously. The verses are all about, well, reputation. Not just her own reputation, but also the man she's singing about. These are all elements of someone's reputation, the things they're known to do, the ways they're known to act. And in both verses, she tries to go against that reputation, due to this relationship being formed between the two of them. Verse 1, his reputation is as this pretty boy who leaves girls wanting more, but maybe she can be the one to keep him. Verse 2, her reputation is the thief who steals boys' hearts and then writes breakup songs about them, but maybe he can be the one to change that and they can be together forever. And the chorus really strips all that energy back to this simple lyric about how she knows they're gonna end up together. He's in her dreams, she's gonna make this one work. The other great thing Taylor is doing here is not just establishing these storylines lyrically, but sonically as well. The reputation storyline is louder, faster, more energetic, whereas the relationship lover storyline is more mellow, melodic, and keyboardy. I don't know, for lack of a better word. And you're gonna see that kind of symbolism sonically throughout the entire album. In fact, the next song, Endgame, is very similar. We have a meshing of both storylines, and once again, portrayed lyrically and sonically at the same time. Like Ready For It, the chorus is much more stripped back. It's more melodic, focusing on how, despite everything else going on, she wants to be with this person forever. And then we cut to the energetic, loud, drum-heavy, big reputation segment. Along with all the other verses, which really kind of go back into the reputation storyline, combining the two, especially Taylor's verse. Keep maps to all the hatchets that I bury. I swear I don't love the drama, it loves me. You know, these are all things about her reputation at the time. Really just about what that word means and how it can consume you. And by establishing these storylines, she's kind of ingraining it in your head already that these are two sides of the same coin. For the remainder of the exposition, she takes her time exploring each storyline separately. I Did Something Bad is just focused on the loud, energetic reputation side of things, focusing on these past feuds she's come under scrutiny for, and how she essentially does not give a flying fuck what the media thinks of her anymore. They're burning all the witches, then light me up. Don't Blame Me then is focused on the other story, how this man is her drug. She needs him. She's obsessed. This relationship is consuming her every fiber. And keep in mind, this is all exposition. She's not necessarily saying anything yet about how these storylines interact or the message she's trying to convey. She's just establishing them. But then we get track 5, the conflict, the inciting incident, Delicate. And literally the first lyric of this song tells us right away how these two storylines intertwine. This ain't for the best. My reputation's never been worse, so you must like me for me. Like, it's such an immense payoff from all the setup before, and it just lingers there with these beautiful, haunting harmonies behind it, and so it really sinks in what all of this means. Track 5 is all about asking some sort of guiding question. It's not the answer, it's the inciting incident. And that's very perfectly laid out here because the entire chorus of Delicate is just a question. Is it cool that I said all that? Is it chill that you're in my head? 'Cause I know that it's delicate. Think back to 1989. This is not only a continuation of those themes and ideas, but also a fresh message spawned out of the new controversy she experienced with the media in 2016. Taylor Swift, at this point in time, actively has a bad reputation. So in Delicate, she's kind of rekindling that hope again, hoping this time works out. And so it's fragile, it's delicate. And that becomes the guiding question for the rest of the album. How do I hold on to this relationship amidst having this big reputation, amidst everyone seeing me as a bad person? The rising action kicks off with Look What You Made Me Do, which is very far into, of course, the louder, vengeful storyline in this album. And the way I see it, it's kind of a reminder of why she's even in this place to begin with. From her rivals to the media to the hate bandwagons, Taylor had no choice but to retreat and hope and wait for things to turn around, wait for the right moment to come back. And so when she did find that strength and she did come back, she came back with a bang. Look what she made her do. And I think the ending skit is just obviously so hilarious, so fun, but it's her throwing shade not only at the media but also herself, showing that she really is ready to move on. She's okay with this bad reputation, you know? She calls back to all the ways the media has portrayed her, from overdone reactions to awards.
You guys! Stop making that surprise face. It's so annoying. Yeah, you can't possibly be that surprised all the time.
To playing the victim.
Oh, there she goes, playing the victim again.
To the Kim Kardashian shade and the iconic, I would very much like to be excluded from this narrative, referencing again her initial reaction to all of the shit that went down in 2016, where she wanted to be excluded. She was scared of her reputation. Now she's tired of it and she doesn't really care anymore. She's done obsessing. And the reason is, again, as is established, because she's finding someone who loves her and cares for her despite all that. And so the rest of this album really is just one one big love letter to that man. Pretty much every single song from here on out is just about how he makes her happy, how he makes her heart flutter, how he makes her horny, all the all the good feels. And there's not really a ton to explain. I mean, these songs are pretty straightforward. They just kind of build on that idea that she's obsessed with him. Really, she is very obsessed with him. She kind of sees him as the perfect man, the king of her heart, and there's no need to concern herself with her reputation anymore. I will mention Getaway Car is kind of interesting here. It takes a little bit of a detour, and it's a little hard to fit into this exact storyline, but I guess it's kind of about her reputation in a sense, as this person running through men, with how she used Tom Hiddleston as a getaway car to escape Calvin Harris. Of course, I'm still glad we got this song. It fits wonderfully sonically into the album. I'm curious if you guys have any thoughts though on like how it fits into the story. Now, identifying which song is the climax is not as easy just because a lot of these songs are very intense in their own ways, but I think a good contender would be a song that once again kind of unites both storylines at the same time in a very high intensity moment, and I think the song here that matches that is Dancing with Our Hands Tied. It's a powerful song that really encapsulates everything so far, the feeling of falling in love, developing something new and fragile and hopeful, but also knowing that it's gonna fall into the same issues as all her other relationships. Scrutiny from the public eye, ridicule, going through its ups and downs, and also her own personal beliefs that love is destined to fail, remember going back to 1989. All of these things I think are laid out in their own ways through these really interesting metaphors throughout this song in the verses, and all of this kind of feels her leaving as if she has no control over the situation, as if her hands are tied and she just kind of needs to let it unfold for what it is and hope for the best. But she's gonna keep dancing, she's gonna stick by this man because of how devoted she is. This is the feeling that's kind of established in Delicate, that initial feeling of light being with someone who you care for, and now it's at its highest intensity, as the climax is in the dramatic plot structure. Keep in mind, I think a big theme in this song is secrecy, right? Wanting to keep this relationship secret, but knowing that it's going to be exposed eventually because of how famous she is, because of her reputation. Like, she really was keeping this relationship very secretive. Even after it was announced they were dating, there were barely any things about them coming out. It was very behind closed doors, and for good reason, She was tired of being scrutinized by the media, and this was really working for her at the time, and she wanted to safekeep it. Then we get into the resolution, trying to resolve this conflict, and I think it's pretty straightforward. Dress is just a continuation of the earlier ideas, again, how her man makes her feel so good, now in a more physical sense, and that she just wants to be his everything, again, unconcerned about the outside world. This is why we can't have nice things, is pretty much a deep dive back into the reputation, vengeance storyline, but now on an uplifting note, where she truly dismisses all the bullshit of her past and realizes that she should just focus on the people who love her real friends, her mother, her man. The laugh in the bridge I think is so great because it's a realization that she doesn't need to forgive. She doesn't need to have a happy ending to every story. She can have this dent in her reputation. People will always, and guess what, people still do kind of hate her, or at least feel rubbed the wrong way, by everything that went down, even if it's been revealed that she was right the whole time. But she's okay with that. Call It What You Want feels like the true resolution to this album, since again, it brings back both storylines in pretty much kind of summarizing the entire album, going back through everything she went through, how she disappeared, and how she built herself back up and found comfort through her lover. The idea of naming this relationship, calling it something, is quite literally the concept of reputation at work. The idea that people will continue to label this relationship and label her based on her reputation, but she doesn't care anymore. I mean, it's right there in the song. All the drama queens taking swings, all the jokers dressing up as kings, they fade to nothing when I look at him. He is all that matters now. And then honestly, the album could end there, but I think New Year's Day is just a way for her to really round out this message of wanting the simple things, not just the grandiose New Year's Eve party, not just the kiss at midnight, but even the cleaning up bottles after that. She's in this for the long run, and it further kind of emphasizes this desire to be away from the spotlight, away from the media. And while Call It What You Want is very explicitly about her lover, her man, I think New Year's Day can be interpreted more broadly to be about all the things that matter to Taylor, her family and friends who stuck by her fans. Again, saying she's not in it for the grandeur, the spectacle, but because she truly feels genuine affection. The bridge of this song, in my opinion, really parallels that of Long Live, which is why I think you can interpret this song kind of being about the fans as well. At the end of the day, the message of this album is pretty simple. Stop giving a damn about a bad reputation. It's the people who truly love you, that you love back, that matter the most, not what everyone else has to say about it. And as much as this is known as Taylor Swift's badass, vengeful era, of course, those are elements of this album, it's also very much her most loving, and honestly, her happiest album. Say what you want about Joe Alwyn, we know now it didn't work out, but that doesn't change what he did for her at the time of this album and what this relationship meant to her, even if those feelings did change over time. And I'm so glad she was able to package all of that into this album in such a beautiful manner, because it really has stood the test of time as a powerful body of work, and it is my personal all-time favorite. So yeah, let's move on. Oh boy. I have been waiting to get to Lover, because Lover is especially notorious for its album construction. I feel like Lover's defining characteristic, as an album at least, is that it's kind of all over the place. For one, this is her longest record with 18 songs, many of which don't necessarily feel tied to the central story of this album. We have the infamous London Boy, Soon You'll Get Better, False God trio in the middle, along with some, interesting, debatable choices for lead singles. But I think a lot of these conceptions about Lover and its structure come from a shallower understanding of its themes and messages. The album's called Lover. It's an album about love, right? Well, not quite. And in order to uncover that underlying story, we're going to continue to use dramatic plot structure, since I think we've garnered pretty good success with it, and it does apply to Lover in its own way. We just might need to take some more creative liberties with how we assign certain tracks to certain parts so that we can make everything fit in. Because again, we're assuming author intention. I don't want to leave out any songs. I don't want to leave out any elements of the structure. It's all there for a reason. And so this is going to be my interpretation of it. This is also another instance where some aspects might line up really well with the structure while others might make less sense, and we might need to come back to them later. In this case, honestly, that's the exposition. It's pretty all over the place, as I talked about in my Ranking Every Album video. And I think that creates some issues right off the bat with the perceived construction of this album, because she's jumping around so much. She's addressing her past feuds. She's addressing this new person she's falling in love with. She's addressing politics. It's kind of like, okay, what's going on? What is this album going to be about? So instead, I want to jump ahead to track 5, The Archer, which is our first clue that this is not necessarily an album about love, despite being titled Lover. The Archer is about anxiety, both lyrically and sonically. Pretty much this entire song is dedicated to what it means to feel anxious. The feeling of knowing you're in a happy place, but still feeling in the back of your mind that something is wrong. I've been the archer, I've been the prey. Who could ever leave me, darling, but who could stay? She knows she's hurt people and been hurt too, so even in a happy place, she's still scared something's gonna go wrong. And of course, that happiness comes from her relationships with other people, especially, the one she's been developing with Joe Alwyn, and ultimately you could still interpret him as the focus of this song. So yeah, she's still singing about her lovers, she's still singing about love to some degree, but in my opinion, that's not really the focus here. A lot of the verses really focus on herself. They're very introspective about her feelings growing up, being alone, pacing in the night, seeing the room on fire, about how all her friends turn into enemies. It's really a reflection on who she is and who she's come to be over the years. And to me, when I listen to this song, she sounds terrified, especially in the bridge. She physically cannot seem to accept her own happiness because she's been so broken in the past. And that seems to be the guiding question set up in this song. How can I be so happy, yet so scared at the same time? Now let's backtrack to the exposition and see how those songs maybe might relate to the concept of fear being established. I Forgot That You Existed is purely a transitional track out of Reputation, saying she's done with that era, she's tabling all the negative feelings, all the feuds. That's not her focus anymore. Cruel Summer is what feels like the real start to this album, and with this mindset of fear, it kind of makes sense, because Cruel Summer is literally all about the fear associated with falling in love with someone, the fear that it won't work. Again, all these things we've already seen Taylor sing about time and time again, but with this new lens. She's matured so much throughout these past albums, she's not concerned about reputation, about other people anymore. She knows love is a beautiful thing, that it can work, but despite all that, despite her devotion to this person, how much she wants to scream that she loves him, she's still scared. And that mix of feelings just feels cruel at the end of the day. It's blue, it's heart-wrenching. She doesn't understand why she can't just let herself be happy. Lover is kind of the opposite of that. This is a pure love song. And I think she said herself, Lover, she wanted it to just be a pure love song. But I think it still works in the exposition, because in order for that fear to be present and to be truly heart-wrenching, she needs to establish that she is in love, that she is devoted, that she is ready for the long run with this person. And so I think Lover is a good song to do that. The Man then establishes the political through line that we see more of later in the album. And I think, again, that can be linked to the concept of fear. I know it might seem like a stretch, but if we want to unify all these songs under one central theme, I think it works. This was a time when Taylor finally wanted to speak up about politics, something she didn't do for a long time because of, well, fear. She was scared of how people would respond. She was scared that her career would halt because of that. But after having gone through all this character development, after having realized that people's perception of you is not always the end-all be-all, you don't need everyone to like you, now she's more confident in speaking up about the things she wants, even if it does alienate some people. And I think The Man is like a great way to set that up in this kind of like fun, upbeat way. So again, you might realize that while this album of course has a lot to do with loving someone, it's also very introspective, exploring Taylor's own feelings about love. Now, we already talked about the conflicts, so now let's go to the rising action. How do we build this idea? I think He Knows and Paper Rings are a couple songs here that are just very straightforward love songs. Again, the way I see it, there's this dichotomy going on between fear and love, how they're kind of two opposites she keeps bouncing back and forth between. And Cruel Summer set up how she feels both at the same time. These songs are just further establishing the love side of things, that she is in love, that she is devoted, that she wants to give her all to this person. She wants to marry him with paper rings, which again, in hindsight, that might have been a cry for help. But at the time in the story, let's just say, it's a cute little love song. Miss Americana and the Heartbreak Prince, meanwhile, is on the opposite side. It's a very fearful song. My team is losing, battered and bruising. I see the high fives between the bad guys. And now the storm is coming. I know this is a fight, and someday we're gonna win. So it's scared. She's scared about something going wrong. The way I think it's commonly interpreted as a metaphor for politics, continuing that political through line from earlier. And honestly, I think this song does a really good job establishing those fearful feelings she had, not wanting to speak out about politics, but now realizing, that is what she wants to do. In fact, I think this song could have been switched with The Man. Like, this would have worked better in the exposition, honestly, but that's a different story. With lyrics like, American glory fading before me, we paint the town blue, I'm crazier for you than I was at 16, seemingly referencing her silence during the 2016 election, though I don't know, maybe that's a stretch. And again, that fear that she's feeling doesn't necessarily have to be about a relationship. That's what she's scared of in The Archer, but here she's just scared about the world in general. So I think more vaguely what she is establishing is just the idea that love and fear can exist at the same time. They can coexist. Even when you're really happy in one aspect of your life, you could be scared and upset in other aspects. And we're going to get a lot more of that later in the album as well. First though, we get to Cornelia Street, where I think the feeling of anxiety and this dichotomy between love and fear is really the clearest out of any point in the album, and it's brought to this really high intensity moment. So I consider this to be a climax. It's very similar to The Archer, honing in on that question of how you can be so happy yet sad at the same time. And she's kind of almost begging her lover to stay, saying that she's grown so attached and close and so reliant that if he ever walks away, she'll never be able to go anywhere that reminds her of him ever again. Now she's letting it out and saying how truly, truly terrified she is of this relationship ending. If you're not getting it by now, Lover is an album about fear. And I think all the varying themes of Lover and all the varying topics she talks about come back to that central concept of fear. Even with the love songs, even with the many songs on this album that are purely just about her devotion to this man, the other songs in between those are very fearful about various different things. And so what she's setting up is how love and fear can exist at the same time. Even in your best times, it's really easy to get trapped in anxiety and bounce between those two and even almost lose yourself in that fear. Now, this is where the album gets a little tricky. Because if Cornelia Street really is the climax, then we have a 9-song resolution, which is the entire second half of the album, and that just feels like too much to resolve. It's not impossible. In fact, a lot of plays utilize a 5-act structure where the climax takes place pretty much in the middle. But I don't think that's what this album is doing, because some of these tracks after Cornelia Street are still very high intensity, and they still feel unsure. They're not really coming to an answer yet. There's no falling action just yet. We're still at this high intensity. The way I see it, the tension in this album only really starts to die down to a resolution from You Need to Calm Down. So what do we do with these 4 songs that are in between? These are still very important to the story. These are some of the most Lover songs on the whole album. They're definitely some of my favorites. So I'm going to interpret this as a slight revision on the dramatic plot structure where we actually have a second climax. We get this initial climactic moment on Cornelia Street, realizing her true deep fears over this relationship ending. And then I think she continues to expand on that idea of fear even further, almost like we come back down and start a new rising action into a second climax. They kind of do a similar thing to the earlier rising action, where they again show both sides of the coin, both fear and love. We have the fear of relationships ending on Death by a Thousand Cuts. We have the love and devotion to her lover on London Boy. We also have a new kind of fear, her first time singing about this, the fear of losing her mother. And it's very intense. It's obviously very intense because intensity doesn't just mean loud, right? It means emotional. And this is easily one of the most emotional songs in her whole discography. Then we get False God. And I think this kind of works as a climax of sorts, a mini climax here in this part of the album. Because even though this might not feel very intense, I think it is a big emotional, fearful moment, similar to Soon You'll Get Better. In fact, I think Soon You'll Get Better and False God can kind of be combined as this new high intensity moment before the album truly does come down to a resolution. But with False God, I mean, it's pretty much a breakup song disguised as this like sexy, sassy song. It's like sex is the only thing keeping this relationship together. That's really what the song is about. And it's like this moment of like, should we be concerned about this? Should we address this? Or should we just continue to worship this false god? I do think she could have gone about this differently. You know, again, that London Boy, Soon You'll Get Better, False God trio is truly tonal whiplash at its finest. And you can watch my other videos for more on my personal opinions on these songs and albums, but for the sake of analysis, this is just kind of what I make of it. And now it feels like we truly do get to resolve those feelings of fear. We have songs like Afterglow, which is about owning up to your mistakes, taking a hold of those fears you might have, and acknowledging you've done wrong in the past, but you can move on from it. It's Nice to Have a Friend is a song, certainly. I honestly think she could have tabled this for folklore, but it's really just a love song. Again, it's showing devotion to this person, showing her appreciation for the little things, you know, similar to New Year's Day and Call It What You Want, reminding herself, you know, of that love. You Need to Calm Down and Me, the two most notorious tracks of this album, the way she kicked off this era. Do you now see why they maybe kind of make sense here at the end? You Need to Calm Down resolves the political through line from earlier in the album on a much less intense note now than either The Man or Miss Americana. Literally like, hey, why be homophobic when you can just take a chill pill? Why be mad when you can be glad? That lyric is so funny. It's silly. It's a silly song. But also I think there is intention behind the silliness. Similar to Me. Me is also a very silly, happy-go-lucky, fun song. But it's because she's trying to table those fears through these very cheerful songs about celebrating yourself, celebrating our differences, you know, as cheesy and cliche as that is. I think that's why a lot of people don't like these songs, because for someone like Taylor who writes a lot of deep-cutting songs, like doing these really cheesy Disney-esque messages just did not feel fitting for her. But that's what she wanted to do with this era, and that's what she wanted to do with this album, show maybe how part of overtaking your own fears is retreating back into those simple messages. Okay, hi, I'm editing, and I feel like what I said about Me and You Need to Calm Down did not make a ton of sense, at least the point I'm trying to make, and it's because I'm leaving out an important part of this story, which is that these were the lead singles to the era, mainly being a transition out of Reputation. While Reputation itself is a happy album, the music itself, like we talked about, it was a very dark era of her life, a very low point for her, truly an all-time low. And so I think these two songs in particular, both being a transition, the lead singles out of that era, and also being the resolution to the feelings of fear present throughout the album itself, what that represents is showing us why she's not scared anymore, because of this immense growth she's undergone, because she saw her whole career fall down around her and has finally overcome those obstacles and is finally settling down. She's able to be cheery and gleeful and yes, silly, but more than anything, it's about the transition out of the darker Reputation era into the more colorful Lover era. And then in the context of the album and the music, it's showing us she's not scared anymore. She's happy. I'm not afraid anymore, you know? Okay, back to the video. And then if you're looking for the truly deep introspective shit that actually resolves the central tension between love and fear, look no further than Daylight, truly a transcendent closer and resolution to this album. Throughout this album, Taylor has been showing us that throughout her life, she's been scared. She's been scared to love without being hurt. She's been scared of addressing politics, scared that she's losing out on the good years. But Daylight tells us that even after all this, Taylor is going to choose love instead of fear. And this is obvious in one of the main lyrics of the song. I once believed love would be burning red, but it's golden like daylight. She used to be scared of love, but now she's embracing it. Now she's stepping out of that mindset into the daylight and realizing that love can be golden because it has its mistakes. It has its ups and downs. There is fear involved. There is validity in feeling scared. but it's all about mindset, you know? And I think this is a pivot kind of from Reputation. Reputation resolved all these fears she had about how people perceived her by just focusing on her lover, talking about how devoted she was to her lover. Here, though, she's now focused on herself. This entire song is really just about her, how she's been sleeping so long in darkness, how she's been scared for all her life. But now she is finally making that choice to step out, to evolve, and choose love over fear. Another really important moment in this song is the ending monologue, where she pretty much says she doesn't want to be scared anymore. I'm afraid of the things that haunt me in the middle of the night. She's admitting that she still gets scared, as is a big theme throughout this entire album. But at the end of the day, she focuses on love. You are what you love. And so she realizes that if she wants to be happy and fulfilled, she herself needs to be a lover. Most importantly, being a lover to herself. There's a reason she kicked this all off with I Forgot That You Existed. She's tabling other people. She just wants to focus on herself. There's a reason the lead single was Me. Yes, hear me out. She's literally yelling at us in all caps with an exclamation point from the start of this era, trying to tell us what this era is all about. It's about me, the me being Taylor Swift, right? It's about her. It's about her own journey with love, fear, politics, relationships, all culminating in a new appreciation she has for love. And so completes the pop trilogy of Taylor Swift's career, 1989 Reputation, Lover. Something interesting going on here in this trilogy is I think all three of these albums are about love to some degree, right? As with pretty much all of Taylor's work, but they each discuss love with a different focus, with a different lens. And that, in my opinion, is what she considers to be the opposite of love at that time in her life. You may have also noticed that with this trilogy as a whole, she was still pretty on par with the dramatic plot structure, but going forward, I think, is where she begins to take a slight departure from that structure as her albums become a little bit more freeform and conceptual rather than story-based. But we are going to be doing that in part 3. So that's going to be all for this part of the analysis. Part 3 will be out once again whenever I have it ready. If you like this and you're interested in seeing part 3 when I have that ready, leave a like and subscribe so you are ready right when I drop that to watch. And also comment down below what you thought of Wicked, if you saw it, because I saw it recently and I was absolutely mind blown. It was wonderful. I'm still obsessed with Cynthia Erivo's Defying Gravity. So if you have nothing else to comment, then you can do that. But thank you again for the support on the first part. I really loved seeing your guys' enjoyment of this. I hope you liked this analysis, and I'll see you in part 3. Okay, bye!